guests this evening. You're on the agenda already. I would like to have a brief conversation with City Council about seating arrangement for our next City Council meeting. Because the mask requirement is being taken off by the governor starting June 2nd, and our next meeting is June the 7th. I guess I'd like direction from City Council either now or the week ahead of that meeting. Would you like to return to our regular seating arrangements? I think many of you, if not all of you, have been vaccinated. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads.
Seating arrangement, we can go back.
Yep.
Please.
Even though I do like this.
All right, we will rework the microphones and be able to do that for the next meeting. Okay. And I welcome all of our guests this evening, and I ask you to join with us in our Pledge of Allegiance this meeting, led by Mrs. Westfall.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Additions to the agenda. I have no items to add. Mr. Fry?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Members of City Council? Mr. Sandberg?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Schroyer?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Chief?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
And we have Joe Shaw here tonight representing the Service Department. Welcome, Joe. Anything to add?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
And Mrs. Brining?
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Then there are no changes to the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as prepared?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the agenda as prepared. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved for tonight's meeting. Agenda item 4 is approval of our meeting minutes from 2 weeks ago on May the 3rd. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move approval of the meeting minutes from council's meeting on May the 3rd, 2021 as submitted.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes from May 3rd, 2021 as submitted. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries and those meeting minutes are approved. With that, we are to agenda item 5, and we have representatives of ARDA joining us this evening. Welcome, Mr. Dunham. Also, our representative, Mary Morrison, to the board. And I believe you have a new title. Laura, what's your new title?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stowe. Deputy Chief Executive Officer.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We have another representative from Tarta Management here. Okay, I need you to introduce yourself.
Hi there. My name is Kelsey Hoagland. I am currently the chair of the board.
Terrific. We're glad you're here.
Thank you for having us. Yes, thanks for having me.
Okay, with that, Kim, I'd like to turn the chair over to you and you can make your presentation.
Sure. So we do have a team with us. I'm going to ask Mary to make some introductory remarks as your representative to the TARTA board, please.
Oh, thank you, Kim. And thank you, Mayor Stowe and members of the City Council for the opportunity to be with you tonight. I am here with members of the TARTA board and as well as TARTA proper to thank you for your past support and really to provide you with an update as to what's going on with TARTA. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Kim, who is our CEO of TARTA, and start the presentation.
Thanks so much, Mary. So I believe Laura is going to share her screen for the PowerPoint. Thank you. So good evening, Mayor Stowe and esteemed members of council. Thanks so much for having us here tonight to provide you an update on the significant and meaningful progress that's been made at TARTA over the past year. It's amazing to think it's only been 1 year since we last stood before you to ask for your support of TARTA's financial future. On the next slide, we have a list of individuals and business partners that we were successful in the Ohio State House this legislative session to include language related to TARTA in House Bill 74, the 2-year transportation budget. This language change allows TARTA to add Lucas County as a member and place a sales tax on the ballot by obtaining majority consent of our member jurisdictions rather than unanimous consent. We want to acknowledge our supporters who rallied this last February and March on the effort, including business leaders and community partners. Next slide, please. And our elected officials, including all of you, for your support as well. Thank you so much. I'd now like to turn it over to Laura, Deputy Chief Executive Officer.
Good evening. So to pick up where Kim paused there is we are completely transforming TARTA with a brand new vision and mission statements. And we've done an incredible amount of discovery and foundational work this past year. As you can see, here is our new mission and vision statement of the organization. And when we visited our member jurisdictions like the city of Sylvania last year, we were often asked, what is your plan? This was an excellent question. And what we found out is that we actually didn't need one plan, we needed 6 plans. That is just how much work we have completed this past year. And as you can see from the covers of these slides, we have really delved into every area of the organization. Our 2020 presentation included these 6 specific goals that are outlined on this slide, and you can see that we delivered on each of the goals. It's really quite amazing because consider this, that we were building a new leadership team. We were striving to work in all of these areas, and it was also during a historic pandemic that disrupted all of our lives, our communities, and our businesses. TARTA adds value to our community, and by making connections, we are striving to really drive economic vitality, improve the quality of life, open doors of opportunity for business and residents to thrive. So this slide just shows you the many ways that we partner in the community. Some have been going on for years, and some are immediate and new. Now I would like to turn to talk about some of our challenges with our financial situation and our current funding model. Our annual budget has been right around $29 million for the past 4 years. And TARTA has been using its federal capital apportionment funding of $6.5 million to offset a mounting operating deficit for years. Then you look at state funding for public transit in Ohio. It's very nominal, and it certainly isn't guaranteed. It fluctuates widely from year to year. Our only guaranteed is our local funding at this time, which is $13.5 million, and it is collected under 2 current millages, 1 and 1.5 property tax. TARTA has entered into service contracts that were not fiscally prudent for the agency, and with that, as you can see, Toledo Public Schools and also University of Toledo. But our board has made the tough decisions when it needed to in the best interest of the organization. And now I would like to turn it over to Kelsey Hoagland, our board president, to talk about investing in our community by building a robust public transportation network.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you again to the city council members who have invited us to join you this evening. So picking up where Laura has left off, building off of the fundamental budgeting principles that we are going to adhere to this year. So just right off your slide here, that's prioritizing our capital investments, seeking competitive grant funds, living within our means, and setting aside reserve funds for our contingency. As we're all aware, the Northwest Ohio region is becoming recognized as a top national contender for businesses to locate and people to live, and we should be leveraging that reputation. As a matter of fact, you may be aware, Site Selection Magazine recently named Toledo as the #1 city for economic investment for cities with a population between 200,000 and 1 million people. Additionally, the Regional Growth Partnership announced that Northwest Ohio was ranked as the #2 manufacturing region in the United States by Business Facilities Magazine. Our area businesses and economic development partners already regularly contact TARDA requesting additional transit service to connect workers to jobs and to attract new businesses to our region. With that, we truly are marketing a region which has already proven to be highly successful, and funding public transit should be considered part of that investment. It is investment right now for our present, but it's also a long-term investment for our future and for our region's future. Next slide, please. With that, this kind of just illustrates that TARDA remains the last public transit system funded locally by property tax in comparison to our larger metropolitan peer communities that have existing public transit. And with property valuation trends being unpredictable and 2 jurisdictions having left TARDA in the past, really this economic model is just not sustainable for our future. Oops, sorry, you guys, I'm clicking on the wrong spot and I keep losing the presentation slide. I'm so sorry. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to show you, this is an example of how a property owner has the opportunity to save under this new funding mechanism. So this is with the understanding that the median home value is approximately $190,000 in our region. And like Laura said, under our current 2.5 property millages, that is an annual spend of approximately $165.77. Then we look at the sales tax model with an annual median household income of just over $76,000. You take that, it's about 35% that we expect people to spend on taxable items. So that puts your annual average spend based on that 0.5% proposed sales tax at approximately $134.35 allocated to TARDA. So you have the potential to save just over $30 a year under this new funding mechanism, which obviously everyone would benefit from who is already within that. And as we were saying, you know, Toledo is really, the reputation is really, the city is really developing a reputation as a destination for businesses to locate, for people to live where they're choosing to work and play. And proper investment in public transportation and in TARDA is necessary to support a modern and sophisticated transit system that this region really does deserve. So with that, we ask for your help by supporting the same request that we brought to you last year, which, like Kim said earlier, is to add Lucas County as a member of TARDA, to eliminate the current property millages at 2.5 rate that we have, and replace that with a 0.5% sales tax, to allocate monies from the sales tax to fund TARDA's operations, and then also to allocate some of those monies from the sales tax fund to support municipal TIF projects. And that's what we're right now looking at, a breakdown of approximately $300,000 for the city of Toledo, and then additionally $90,000 for each of those member municipalities. Again, this is the same exact request where we brought to you last year, just bringing it back to the forefront as we move toward our future. And just as a note, we will be returning in July after the transportation budget becomes a law on July 1st to obtain your approval for these requests. And with that said, thank you so much for having us, and we would be glad to answer any questions that you all may have.
Well, let me make one comment right off the bat. It's my understanding that you need the members of TARDA to take action during the month of July, starting July 1st and by the end of July or so. The city council only has one scheduled meeting in July, that being on Monday, July 19th. So we've got one shot at it without scheduling a special meeting. We will like to come with prepared legislation. In fact, if you could supply us with that legislation in advance, perhaps we can refer it to committee before that night, and it can come back to city council already having gone to committee. Is that a possibility?
It's absolutely a possibility. It's being scrupulously vetted by legal counsel to be sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, as I'm sure you can understand. But the hope is within 2 weeks, max, we will circulate the draft resolution / ordinance. Absolutely.
Okay, that would be very helpful. We do have 2 meetings in June, one on June the 7th, one on June the 21st. And we could take a look at that and have it referred to committee. This is Westfall.
I have a couple quick questions, Kim. Number one, you referenced the transportation budget. So if you could give me a little bit of a highlight of what you anticipate would be impacted by the transportation budget as it directly relates to this. And then second, what about the partner communities? Do you still need an okay from all of the partner communities? That seems to have been the point of hiccup, and I did think there was some discussion of a change in that requirement, and so I'm just trying to make sure if there has been any change.
Thank you for the question. There absolutely has been change. That is exactly what House Bill 74, the transportation budget, did. Brian Dickin and the Toledo Chamber of Commerce worked very closely with the governor's office to be sure that in the as introduced version of the transportation budget included the TARTA language that changed our requirement to obtain unanimous consent of our 7-member jurisdictions to majority consent. As it traveled through the State House, it was removed in the House version of the transportation budget, but reinstated in the Senate version, and not through a formal reconciliation process, but through bipartisan efforts, is included in the version of the transportation budget that the governor signed, I believe, on March 31st. So it takes 90 days for that to become law, and that's why July 1st is our target date for our critical path timeline.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I had to repeat that. I missed it in the description, but I'm sure you probably did explain it. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from members of City Council? This is Cappellini.
So this isn't exactly a question. I'm sure you have a list of added stops and routes on one of your many studies that you presented. And I'm really just passing on a request from Judge Bonfiglio from our municipal court that he would hope that you could add a stop at the municipal court in Sylvania, because there are a lot of people trying to turn their lives around, having a really difficult time making their court date without a bus stop there.
So 2 comments on that. I see nodding heads, which is why I love the new executive team at TARTA. You see all these head noddings. I'm sure we will look into that immediately, and we strongly encourage everyone who's interested to participate in the TARTA comprehensive operational analysis to become part of our stakeholder group and come to our community meetings to give input on what the future design of TARTA looks like. This is the time. This is absolutely the time. So thank you.
Great. Seeing no more questions, we will look forward to receiving your proposed legislation once you've vetted it, so that we can translate it for Sylvania and vet it here and send it to committee and be all ready to go on the 3rd Monday in July.
Mr. Mayor, I did have,
Mr. McCann.
if I could please, the anticipated revenue from the sales tax that would be apportioned for TARTA, what do you expect from 0.5%?
May I ask you to repeat the question? I'm not sure I heard the very first portion of it.
I'm asking what the revenue expectation is from the sales tax.
Approximately $32 million per year.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, if there's nothing more, we appreciate you attending our meeting via our Zoom connection. And if we have any questions before July, we'll be back in touch with you. But again, thank you for attending and best wishes for a good evening.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right, we are now up to agenda item 6, which is proposed ordinance 12, 2021. This is the bicycle parking ordinance change to our off-street parking requirements. There is enclosed in your council packets a copy of that ordinance that's been updated by the law department. This is a zoning issue. We'll start with you. If you've got any questions or if you're ready to introduce it.
No, I think we're ready to move forward with this. We had a annexation and zoning committee meeting on it. And this is the law director's revisions, the recommendations of the committee. So if it's already in, Mr. Mayor, I'll move adoption of ordinance number 12-2021. And I will read by title only. Amending chapter 1157 off-street parking of the Sylvania codified ordinances 1979 as amended by adding section 1157.16 bicycle parking, modifying the recommendation of the Sylvania Municipal Planning Commission, and I move adoption of ordinance number 12-2021 as an emergency measure.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance 2021 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 12-2021 is enacted as an emergency measure. Thank you for your work on that issue. Moving on to agenda item 7. We're back to you with an update about the purchase of a dump truck. At the last meeting, Mr. Allers asked you to move ahead with the purchase of the dump truck without the trade-in allowance. This ordinance 41-2021 is to reduce the purchase price with a trade-in allowance of $7,500. Any comments on that, Mr. Shaw?
No, I think you said everything really well. It has the trade-in value of $7,500. So we reduced the purchase price on that. The Whiteford Kenworth feels that they can rehabilitate the truck, do some work with the body to get it so it's resellable again. We think we can get more on a trade-in value with this particular vehicle than we would with W's. So that's the reason it's in front of you today.
All right, thank you. So you have ordinance 41-2021. Mrs. Westphal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move adoption of ordinance number 41-2021, authorizing the trade-in of the dump truck currently used by the Division of Streets Department of Public Service in the amount of $7,500, reducing the purchase price appropriated by ordinance number 38-2021 to $75,660, determining said dump truck to be no longer needed for municipal purposes. I move final passage of ordinance number 41-2021 as an emergency measure.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance 41-2021 as an emergency measure. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 41-2021 is enacted as an emergency measure. Moving on to agenda item 8. We have in front of us a request for a joint cooperating agreement between the City of Sylvania and Olander Park relative to Fossil Park improvements for this year. This is a grant application that requires the City of Sylvania to participate as the main lease holder, the owner of the lease. We're happy to have Erica Burry here tonight. If you'd like to make a presentation on that, Eric.
Sure, just really quick to clarify, the project that we're looking at is on property owned by the City of Sylvania, not on Hanson property, so it does not impact the lease with Hanson Aggregates at all.
Thank you.
We already have an operating agreement with the City of Sylvania, so this is a separate item for your approval for these three projects technically: a shelter, a playground, and the ADA accessible ramp into the fossil pit. We will be writing a grant only for the ramp. So that's the biggest piece of the project. We'll be submitting that grant to NationWorks June 1st. And so that's why we need this agreement. We will be submitting it on behalf of the City of Sylvania because we are not the property owner. We cannot submit it ourselves. So we're doing all the behind the scenes work, and that grant will be submitted in your name, and then essentially we will pay for the project. Does that make sense?
It does. Just to say it a different way, the City Council and the taxpayers of Sylvania won't be responsible for making up the difference between the project and the grant amount.
That's exactly right. Those funds are designated in the Orlando Park System budget.
Very good.
Yeah, and there will be a letter submitted to the grant that specifies that as well. And if you have any questions about the project itself, then Dan is here to help you answer them.
Hi, Dan. Not seeing any questions. We do have ordinance 42, 2021 prepared for us in our council packets. Mrs. Capellini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to introduce by title only ordinance number 42-2021, authorizing the mayor and director of finance to enter into a joint cooperation agreement on behalf of the city of Sylvania with the Orlando Park System relative to the 2021 Fossil Park Improvement Project. I move for passage of ordinance number 42-2021 as an emergency measure.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance 42, 2021 as an emergency measure. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries and ordinance 42, 2021 is enacted as an emergency measure.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. No need to stay longer. You're
Okay.
welcome to stay as long as you like.
I think go ahead. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
And we might have an opportunity to read about this project in the Toledo Blade here
Yep.
pretty soon. Both Erica and I were contacted by the reporter today.
Have a good day.
Okay, we're now up to agenda item 9. This is for a new liquor permit, D1, D2, and D3 for Joseph Starlight Plaza LLC, 5700 Monroe Street, 5702. Chief, have you had a chance to take a look at this?
I did, Mayor. This packet came in about 2 weeks ago from the Ohio Department of Liquor Control. We did go ahead and complete the packet as we normally do when these come in. We've conducted our checks as far as local criminal background checks on the applicants, and no adverse information was obtained. And at this point, I would have no reason to recommend a hearing at this time.
Chief, do you know, is this the same folks that operate the?
It is, I believe there are some different names because we got a full application this time, but I don't know anything else about the business. We simply check the local criminal history on the applicants. So.
Okay.
And I see that it's new, which we don't see very many new coming through. I believe that there's a limited number of permits that were allowed, so there is some space for new permits then.
There must be, because they've made it through the initial application process, and we're just this is the opportunity for local opposition if it's a problem location or if there's an issue with the applicants.
And so do we know if this is a retail store or is it a?
I thought perhaps it was the old Ralphie's property.
The address is Ralphie's.
Yeah.
Mhm. It has a patio, so.
Yeah.
I'm not aware.
Patio, yeah.
I'm not aware of new liquor permits being created, though they could be. This is more likely one that's been purchased and transferred into the city.
And typically they're tied to the location when you buy you have a chance to take a license or what have you. I thought I saw that they were increasing the hours or something, or asking for it. But again, as far as our purposes, the application, issues like backgrounds.
It does say extend issue permit privileges until 2:30 a.m. So is that in conflict with our zoning code? I don't think so in that zoning code. I don't think it is.
Not to my knowledge. That should be a problem in that area.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay. Thank you.
And if there's no questions or concerns, the proper motion is to motion not to request a local hearing on this new permit. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make a motion not to request a local hearing for Joseph Starlight Plaza LLC liquor permit for D1, D2, D3, and D3A.
Second.
Moved and seconded not to request a hearing for this new liquor permit at Starlight Plaza, 5700 Monroe Street. All in favor of that indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries and the clerk will respond accordingly. We're now up to agenda item 10, which is committee reports. First one on here is a report from the Employee and Community Relations Committee concerning mobile food trucks in the city of Sylvania. Mr. Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On May 6th, we had a meeting regarding the food truck legislation. It really started out with Leslie informing us how she's amended it. And I know there's been quite a few revisions of this. So sorry about that. She updated the amendments to the legislation and the penalties and space allocation provisions that were updated in this new version. Mr. McCann clarified that the provision for the licensing fees, and then Ms. Brining stated that she could clarify the language to exclude special events in the legislation. And Mr. Aller said that if we wanted to go this route, he could have the software system in place by June 1st for reserving spaces. And he also believed that the legislation to be a little too complex and lengthy. And we could model it off of what Perrysburg has done. For reference, ours at the start of that meeting, I believe it was a 14-page legislation, and we got it down to a page and a half and kind of simplified it and used the same model that Perrysburg has used under the notion that it'd be easier to add something if we need. Mr. McCann moved to ask administration to draft a new legislation based on the Perrysburg model, and that motion passed 4-0. And then let's bring us to the legislation.
Have you had a chance to review this legislation, and does it meet what?
In my opinion, it does. If anybody else on council has any questions, but this seems to be just what Kevin and I talked about. And it was that, all throughout the legislation, it listed the service director to do a lot of things. So we wanted to make sure he was comfortable with being able to enforce what it said.
Okay. You recall one of my concerns was noise levels, and that's not in this legislation. However, I believe the service director is going to have in his requirements that they do tie into portable power, temporary power, if it's available. If not, they'll be allowed to use a generator. But they can't come in and say, I don't want to pay the fee for the power, I'm going to use my generator.
Mm-hmm.
That's better for the environment, the downtown environment.
The legislation does not indicate that, though, is that what's but he has the power.
Yeah, it does give him.
Yep.
And that was sort of the idea that he could have the authority to exercise it as he sees fit. And then if we decide we need to add something later, it'd be easier than the legislation we had last time.
I have a question, if that's all right.
Yes.
I noticed in it for the registration that it's $100 and that it is for the calendar year and not for an entire year. And I was just wondering what the thought process was behind that, as opposed to if I were to get it on September 1st and it expiring on December 31st, as opposed to it going on the rest of the year. I'm just curious what the thought was.
I believe, if I recall, that came up in one of my conversations, and I wish Kevin was here to clarify, but I thought it was just the ease of having a date that they'd all have to renew. Instead, then somebody would be organizing, somebody would have to keep a watch and say, okay, well, this guy's up on September 1st and this guy's up on October 15th. And I think that added a layer of complexity internally. Is that?
You're right, Mr. Richardson. That is what Kevin and I talked about in terms of the permit dates and expirations. I believe one of the earlier versions had it like March 31st, and that was just going to be, to have staggered expiration dates would be a little cumbersome. So that's the reason.
That was the thinking, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that might impact some of the food truck vendors for 1 year, but after that, they're all going to get on the same schedule. Questions or comments from members of City Council? We do have this legislation in the package, ordinance 29, 2021. If you're ready to present it, Mr. Richardson.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to introduce by title only ordinance number 29-2021, amending the codified ordinances 1979 as amended by adding Chapter 769 mobile food vehicles, and I would move adoption as an emergency measure.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for passage of ordinance 29, 2021 as an emergency measure. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and ordinance 29, 2021 is enacted as an emergency measure. Thank you for the work on that. We'll get it signed up. It's my understanding that this will be in effect for the first Friday on June 4th. Okay, very good. Agenda item 10B is a report from the Utility Committee. There was a meeting scheduled for tonight, but had to be delayed at Mr. Aller's request for refuse alternates.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to try to reschedule that meeting tonight.
Yes, I would like to, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to try for the same time, 7 o'clock, before our next council meeting, if that's available.
It looks like the door up.
No,
That is,
it would have to be at 6:30.
so would 6:30 work for the committee?
That's
What's that date?
June 7th, I believe, right?
At 6:30 p.m.
Yes.
At that meeting, Mr. Aller will be able to present options that we got back from our current vendor for public services, which seemed quite favorable. They would be providing the toters, and this would be our last allowable extension of that contract, last 5-year extension. I think it's better. You need to hear his report on it, but that's what the meeting will be about.
Katie?
It's good with me.
Yeah. All right. So I move the meeting to be held June at 6:30 before the next council meeting. June 7th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. We have that Utilities Committee meeting on June 7th at 6:30 p.m. in these council chambers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and the clerk is instructed to post that meeting. You don't have the zoning committee listed on here. Mr. Hayden, can you give us an update where we are on the cell tower legislation? You don't need it if you're not ready.
Well, I'm giving you a report. We have some promised materials and we haven't received it.
That's the report.
So
Okay,
we're waiting to receive those numbers too.
very good. Any other committee reports to be made at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have a committee report, but I would be interested in seeing if we could hear any updates on Cushman Road.
I can. I can report that last Monday, Mr. Sanford met with 10 property owners up in the neighborhood. And he can make his comments, but I'll just get him ready for that. And told the residents that, one, we felt it best that we restart the current contract with admonitions to the contractor that they not block anybody's driveway without prior notice, that the road remain passable, and that trash and other debris not be left in people's front yards. The reason for that is we want to get the project finished as we look at the other alternatives moving forward from here. We will come back to City Council with a letter of recommendations from the administration about what those alternatives can be. I may be preempting you here, Mr. Sanford. Help me out if I need it. There's really 3 ways that the city can take a look at it. One is to leave the project as is. The contract's going to be completed. The grass is going to be done. The road's going to be paved. The driveways are going to be finished. I don't think that's the proper thing to do. We've had complaints from 10 of the 28 property owners. We got to at least consider some of the options. The service department is looking at the cost on a per property basis that would be necessary to put that storm drainage underground and the swales to be filled in. And then decide whether the city council wanted to do that as an assessment project, or the third option is that the city can pay for it entirely for the residents. which does set a precedent for future projects. May not be the right solution. We don't have all those numbers yet. Mr. Sanford, anything you want to add to that?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. As you said, there were 10 property owners present at the meeting. We met in the Duval's front yard. One neighbor came from, that lives on the corner at Belfour. It was very positive. I think it was just a different environment, and I think they felt more comfortable. And some didn't even understand that they were part of a city council meeting when they came here. So we just did some explaining and went through some things. And I think they're just trying to find what's the resolution. I think they understand how the assessment process would work. The key to that would be, what would the assessment be? That's what they wanted to know. And I said, that's just something we need to get back to them, which they seem to accept. That day, and we had stopped, Kevin had told them to stop the project. And the biggest concern are the driveways and the conditions and getting out of their driveways. And they were having problems with their cars. And so then the mayor said, let's finish the project and get the driveways done. And so that'll be a big plus. They like the improvement to the road. That's going to be finished. And then I told them we'd come back with some options to, as the mayor explained, how to move forward. So I think we've got it in a good place with them. We both agreed they come into city council meeting in a short period trying to get across their point. It's much easier to meet like we did to kind of find out more where they're at. And I think they even agreed, and they all talked about when they had met with Joe, and Joe answered all their questions and everything. And I said, you have a great, this was engineering wise, this is a very good project. You know, the problem is it's in your front yard. And that's where they're so there's nothing wrong with the project. The design was right. If you came from somewhere, you were the first time you came, this is what I said to them. You'd look at this and say, boy, this is the way it's supposed to work. It just wasn't what they had in mind. You know, they thought of a much smaller kind of a swale than how it turned out. But so I think it was just some misunderstanding things. I think we got it back on track. Now we just have to come back with the resolution.
We didn't want to leave the neighborhood torn up with mud in the front yards as we go through the months that it's taken. If it turns out to be an assessment project, that's a long process. I've had the law director give me the steps necessary to do that. We haven't done an assessment project in the city since very early in my administration. And it involves several steps. We have to pass an ordinance for a project. They all get a look at their assessments. Then it comes back here. We have to establish an assessment equalization board. And it's a many months long process. However, it is standard procedure in the city of Sylvania, not for all the taxpayers in the city to pay for improvements in a neighborhood that they didn't originally pay for in the first place. And that's where the confusion has come in. If you remember the resident speaking about her frustration with the speed bump ordinance that she has to do petitions, she referred a couple of times to the curbs and sidewalks and underground storm sewers in the subdivision to her north. Well, those residents all paid for those improvements when they bought their lots or they bought their homes, and they have not paid for those improvements here. And if we set a precedent that residents get free improvements if they just make enough noise, City Council needs to decide if that's a precedent that you want to set. Maybe there are extenuating circumstances on this one that you can set it aside and say, yep, this one time, well, Mr. Aller has informed me there are a couple other projects coming that are still on unimproved streets.
Mayor, just to add that, you know, the other thing, if 10 years ago, there were some pretty rough properties on that street. There's been a lot of improvement. There were young families moving in. There were about 4 kids at the meeting, you know, some in strollers and such. And so it was a nice to get a feel for, there's a good vibe, I think, on that street now. So
I think there is too. There's proud property owners. Just to give City Council a bracket, the estimate for moving all the sewers underground is less than $250,000. And we will have a list and alternatives for you at a future meeting. Mrs. Westman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate your feedback, and Joe, I appreciate your meeting with those homeowners. I've been back past there a few times. The road looks great actually now. And the driveways were almost all done. I think only one driveway wasn't complete at this point. But I do think that if council members haven't driven through there, it might be helpful to take a look at it before we have this discussion among us, because as much as the street looks great and the driveways look great and it all makes sense and you understand it, you can also think about if that was in your yard where you would be concerned. And so I don't have the answer myself. I'm so glad that that's something the administration will recommend to us. The beauty of just being a council member. And, but I think it'll be helpful for us all to understand kind of what we're doing.
We'll bring in the alternatives and looking forward to the grass growing in there so we can take off the stormwater protection screens that are at the low ends of those drainage ditches so the water stops standing. That we can't let runoff go into the storm ways. So until those fabrics are removed, we can have standing water. And it'll look better when the grass is in. We can all take another look at it. There is concern about saying, well, this person wants it underground and this person doesn't. That engineering wise is not recommended to us by our service department. I think it's one or the other. Now, apparently it's possible for Mrs. Duvall's property, because it's at the top of the hill, to do hers and the one next to it. That was an offer that Mr. Heenan made, or not Mr. Heenan, I'm sorry, looking at you, Todd, that Mr. Aller made, because they are adjacent and at the top. And there's also the possibility of having their ditch a little shallower too is another alternative.
Yeah, at the top of the street, their houses right there, because those first couple houses, but you know, the first few times they're like, oh, there's already a thing about it.
Okay. So we'll be back to you, probably not at the first meeting in June, but we're going to work our way through these alternates. And it will be council's decision which direction you want us to go. We'll try to outline the dollar amounts. Again, it's under $250,000. Hopefully it's down around 200,000. We're checking the numbers.
I just have a question. Maybe this is a dumb question, but you brought up a good point of improved streets versus unimproved streets. And if you bought a house that's already in an improved street. So when we're doing the projects in the unimproved streets, maybe we need a policy that we ask people if they want to change their street to an improved street and then have the assessment versus, I mean, because when you say it like that, it makes so much more sense.
We had offered it to them this time, and that's what some of them were saying.
And I don't know if we need, is that a committee or is that something that administration decides or?
That has been city policy for a long time. I don't know if there's not an official written down in place. We don't come across this very often.
I can see that.
Are already improved.
Except on over in that area, there's quite a few that aren't improved, but it would be nice to have that option to say, hey, I'd like to bring up my street to improved.
We paved all those streets over there in the last couple of decades, but we didn't do storm sewer improvements. And that's what's caused the difference here with the swales.
I have driven back there a few times. It's interesting to see the progress.
At least now you go all the way down the street. A couple of weeks ago, you couldn't make it all the way.
No, I know. You felt like you're going to get hit by one of the construction trucks.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the question. Any other questions about Richmond Road? If there are none, we've come to the end of our agenda for tonight. If there is no further business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries and the city council stands adjourned until our next regularly scheduled meeting 3 weeks from tonight on Monday, June 7th at 7:30 p.m. Thank you all for attending.